Before we start, any questions you guys have, we will be asking for you at the end of the presentation. Questions can be typed in the chat of this Zoom meeting or on the DigiCon channel on Slack, or can be texted to the ESWHQ Google number that has been sent out in emails, and we can probably put in the chat as well. But it is my pleasure to introduce Amanda Richardson. Amanda was the lead brewer and sustainability coordinator at Fullsteam Brewery in Durham, North Carolina for 4 years. She currently works at Impact Earth as an educator in their Zero Waste Schools program and is the development director at Flower City Pickers, a nonprofit food rescue in Rochester, New York. Her work focuses on sustainability and environmental justice through education, partnerships, and community organizing. So with that, Amanda, whenever you're ready, take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you to everyone who came. I'm glad that this is still able to go forward despite everything that's going on in the world right now. As Sarah said, I am the development director for Flower City Pickers. I started in that role about 3 months ago. I recently moved to Rochester in August, so this is a great way to get involved in the community. So this is a topic that I knew something about, but I've learned so much more in the past 3 months, and I'm sure there's a lot more for me to learn. But I'm going to talk to you today about food waste, some of the causes that go into it and the motivational systems, and then can't wait to hear your thoughts and questions at the end, because I think we need a lot of people coming from a lot of different perspectives to solve the problems that go into that cause food waste. All right, so looking at the problem that that we're trying to solve with food recovery, at least 30% of the food produced in the United States is wasted. Some of the estimates are up to 40%. That's 63 million tons or 126 billion pounds of food. That's a lot of food, and that takes a lot of resources to make that food. So as you can see in this chart here, that's $218 billion being spent on wasted food. There's 21% of water use in the United States is going toward growing that wasted food, 19% of the fertilizer, 18% of the cropland, and then it ends up in the landfill, taking up about 21% of the volume in the landfill. So we're putting all of these resources into making something and transporting it and manufacturing it and getting it so that it ends up in the landfill to produce methane and further contribute to climate change. Doesn't make a lot of sense. And I put a note here at the bottom that these images and this data comes from ReFed, which is Rethink Food Waste Through Economics and Data. I'll be referencing them a little bit in the upcoming slides as well, but I just want to point that out if this is a topic that you're interested in and looking at seeing what other people have done in this area. They are a great resource and worth looking into. The other part of the problem is that meanwhile, 1 in 9 households in the United States is food insecure. And we're also pouring resources into fighting that problem. So federal programs cost the federal government $94.8 billion for hunger relief programs. And from a handful of states that I looked at, it looks like their programs are at least 30 to 40 million annually. So those two problems looked at together seem like, oh, there's a really obvious solution there. And it's currently the most popular solution is that nonprofits like food banks and like Flower City Pickers, they accept food that doesn't meet the retailer standards. So that can mean they labeled a whole bunch of something with the wrong label and they can't put it on their shelves legally. It can mean it's a dented can. It can mean for produce that it's bruised or just ugly. And so retailers donate that food, and then the food bank, or in the nonprofit, goes through that and is connected with hunger relief agencies and gets it to them. But if you look at the food recovery hierarchy from the EPA on the right here, the most preferable thing would be source reduction. And there definitely are people working on source reduction solutions. ReFed that I mentioned, they proposed 27 different solutions to food waste, and 12 of them are prevention techniques. So there are definitely people that realize that this is a problem, but a lot of what is happening in this country comes in after that. Like us and like food banks, the food has already been produced and processed and gone to the retailer and not been able to be sold. And then we're just trying to get it to that next point to feed hungry people. So right now, the main solution is coming in after the source reduction point, which in some ways makes sense because we actually see more than 80% happening at the retailer and the consumer level. So you're like, oh, that's where the biggest problem is. That must be the lowest hanging fruit, instead of backing up and being like, why is there so much excess in that part of the cycle? So a little bit about how what we do and how we fit into it. We are one of those nonprofits that takes, in our case, mostly produce. We operate out of the Rochester Public Market, which is a huge market. There are local farmers there, but there are also wholesalers there. So that's generally people who have bid on a pallet of excess food, and then they break it down and sell it in the market format. So the food that we get from the market might be a small donation from a small farmer who says, you know, I'm not going to be able to sell these potatoes today, and I don't think they'll make it until the next market. So I'd rather have someone eat it in the meantime than not sell it. But it could also be that we get a pallet of something from, or a half pallet of something from a wholesaler who bought it, got what they could out of it, and then the rest doesn't look sellable and it's not worth their time to go through it. So we take that time to go through it. We have volunteers. Usually we operate there on Saturdays. We have a bunch of volunteers who help sort it, and we'll extract the stuff that is suitable for human consumption and get that to shelters, and what isn't suitable for human consumption goes to local farmers for animal feed, and any remainder is composted with a local compost service here. So this is just a little map of how many the agencies we serve around Rochester. So upper left hand corner, one example of what happens with the food is that it goes to a library, and people can shop for free there and get a bag of produce for themselves. Bottom right is a Manhattan Square Family Medicine, and they help counsel people on nutrition and people with diabetes and that sort of thing, what kind of diet would be better for their condition, and then they're able to give them some of that food that they might not have access to otherwise. So in that way, Flower City Pickers really fits into the conferences like Yes in My Backyard theme. It is really great for getting people involved. Like I said, we have volunteers come and do sorting and delivery. Right now, during this difficult time, we're not operating at the market, but we're still getting food from grocery stores and restaurants and that sort of thing, and getting it to people, and people are helping out with those deliveries. So having something local and that something people can be involved with and understand and say, oh, like I go to the public market, there was all this stuff going to landfill, but it can get to people, and there's an organization that does that. It just illustrates it so that they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. and that they are then aware of food waste. And then maybe if they're a gardener, they ask us, can we donate some extra stuff from the garden? And it's based at the community, at the public market, which is very representative of the Rochester community. So you can go there and also be like, oh, there are people right here. If I pick up this delivery it's going 10 minutes from here. There are people in my community that are part of the market who are food insecure. So it really brings it home. So in that way, like a small organization, where we save about, on average, we keep about 2,000 pounds, a ton of food out of the landfill, which, given those numbers I gave you earlier, seems like a very small number, but it does have a large impact in our community in terms of people knowing about food waste and knowing about food insecurity. And this picture is just of our unofficial mascot, Bernice, who lives on one of the farms that we give food scraps to, and she just makes people happy, so I put her in there. So then looking at the larger organizations that service the food insecure, Feeding America, which is the umbrella organization over all of the food banks in the US, or most of them. That was founded in 1979. Over the next decade, the number of food banks went from 13 to 180, which was in large thanks to the recession in the early 80s. So it was really an emergency system. It was set up to deal with a large problem and now it's become the norm. I was born after 1979, and I just thought, oh, like food banks, they've always been here. They're a thing. They're not even a thing necessarily in every country in the world. So, and part of the reason that they continue to be in existence is because they benefit people, and we like to think that they benefit the population that's receiving the food, but in truth, they have connections to large corporations that also benefit. And for example, Walmart has a number of employees that are on SNAP benefits. Walmart is also a large donor to Feeding America. So while they're not paying their employees necessarily enough to be able to buy the food that they need some of that federal assistance from that $94.8 billion we were talking about earlier. They aren't paying them enough to do that, and then but then they're donating millions of dollars to Feeding America, looking like they're fighting the hunger problem. So they're kind of playing both sides of that coin, and they redeem 1 out of every 5 of SNAP dollars. So they don't have a lot of incentive to change the system because they're benefiting from it. So that got a little bit into the economic and social injustice part of hunger, which is obviously a huge topic and a systemic thing that plays into a lot of things. But it's important to recognize when we're looking at the stakeholders in this whole system that we realize it's not just this food waste exists, this hunger exists, like why does that hunger exist? And it's tied into wages and poverty, and it affects communities of color at higher rates than the general population. So it's just good to keep in mind that there are these larger frameworks that affect a lot of things in our society, and this is one of them. This isn't happening in a vacuum. Additional things that are motivating people all along the food system, starting with what farmers grow. So there are subsidies, namely for soy and corn, that will motivate farmers to continue to grow those crops even past the demand for them, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. That's why corn syrup is in a lot of things. And so starting right there, we're giving them a motivation to do something that doesn't necessarily make sense economically or socially. Retailers want to sell as much as possible, obviously. And they also then apply that to wanting to donate as much as possible. I went to a presentation by the sustainability coordinator at our large local chain, and that was the message, that they're very proud of how much they donate, and they want to donate more. They just kind of keep upping their goals of poundage that they're going to donate. And that really struck me as an odd motivation to put in place, because that means that you're wasting more. So again, it's a little bit like the Walmart example, where it benefits them to not have to landfill it. They do also do some composting and things like that. But they can donate it. Food banks will take everything that they're donated because they want to keep receiving it. So they're not going to say, no, we won't take 80 pounds of gum like that. That's not really getting at our mission. They'll take it all and then either find a home for the gum or throw it out. But that it plays into the numbers to say, oh, you know, like we donated all of this food. So they're not motivated to, they're motivated to keep overproducing, overstocking, and then donating, because once again, it looks like they're helping the food, the hunger issue, but also maximizing their profits. And then lastly, I have in there something, I know we have folks from all over, but something that's big on New Yorkers' mind right now is the food donation and food scraps recycling law. And that is going into effect here, January 1st of 2022. And it's already was implemented in Vermont in its own form. But for here, it's basically that food scrap generators that produce over 2,000 pounds a week. So mostly we're talking grocery stores, universities, that sort of thing. K through 12 schools and healthcare facilities are exempt at this point. They have to donate any food that's donatable, and then recycle any food scraps that are not, if they have a recycler within 25 miles of their facility. So the hope is that they that spurs in the more rural areas of New York, that spurs composters and anaerobic digesters to open up, so that there's the infrastructure so that they can then apply this law to smaller generators as well. But once again, that is looking at the food after it's already been produced and processed and all of that, and is looking at limiting it. And the part about not getting into the landfill is what that's targeting, versus any kind of prevention or hunger relief. So my question today, or something that I've been thinking a lot about that I'm interested in hearing more from all of you, is that it's clear to me that the food system in the US is very inefficient. And looking at that initial chart of how many resources go into something that's going to end up in the landfill, like for sustainability reasons, it's not efficient. Business reasons, although a business has been constructed around it that, like I said, was created for an emergency situation. And you know, being in an emergency situation right now, we can think of a lot of things that are being put into place that we're thinking, oh, this is a temporary thing, but we now have, you know, that same thing happened with our food system, and it's still just the way it is. But with my example of the grocery store that is has goals of increasing poundage of donations, it seems like we could apply an efficiency measure there and say, how efficient is this grocery store being? How much are they bringing in, and how much is waste? How much are they sending out that they couldn't use in their business model? That would motivate, if that were the number they were trying to shrink inefficiencies instead of grow poundage, that seems like a better motivational system. Even from in other parts, like the farmers, could they be using the same amount of resources and do a second harvest of apples on the ground that can be used for applesauce and get more revenue out of using the same resources? It just seems like all along the line, if everyone was aiming for efficiency instead of looking at raw numbers, raw poundage, that could be a better motivator and give us a better idea of what we're trying to do. So my question is, could a focus on measurements of efficiency lead us to create better goals and design a better system that gives us favorable environmental and social outcomes? And if you want to reach out to us in the future, I have our contact information there and our social media, and I would love to hear your questions and comments.
Thank you, Amanda. That was a really awesome presentation. I always find your the organizations in Rochester to be just so really inspirational to like the college sustainability communities. We have a couple questions for you. The first one, how would you visualize a program like Flower City Pickers working in a different city? Is there something unique about Rochester that makes it work?
Great question. There are food rescues. We're part of the Food Rescue Alliance, and it was started out in Colorado. There are a number in Colorado. There's 412 Food Rescue in Pittsburgh. So there are these kind of organizations are happening all over the country. And different things work for different cities. Our city is pretty spread out. Like biking deliveries doesn't work that well for us. So, but other cities, it makes a lot of sense. So each one is a little bit different, but it's definitely happening in a lot of cities. And there are things, like I mentioned, even programs that focus on gardeners that could work better in a more rural area where people have land to, certainly it can work in an urban area as well. We're looking into it. But if you were in a rural area, then you could have a lot of people who maybe already are gardening or have the space to garden, and getting food from them to people who need it. And that has, added like quality benefits to it too. So it definitely can work in other cities, but you have to consider different local aspects to make it work for you.
Awesome. Our second question, what advice would you give someone who is trying to start a nonprofit in their community?
Well, I would say, so Flower City Pickers has been around since 2015. And it was started by a single person who saw both the waste and the need and put those things together, and rallied people around them. And, we're still here today and growing. So I think finding something that you're passionate about and that you can talk to other people about and be passionate about is important. And also being aware of financial resources. There are a lot of different grants and things available. And this organization has found that through kind of planning through grants and articulating things through grants helps realize where you're going, where you want to go, and have those conversations about what you want to do. So yeah, I guess those are the two things. Do something you care about and can get other people to care about, and take advantage of resources that are out there to have, and use those to have important discussions about the future of your nonprofit.
Awesome. All right, our next question is an audience question. Are there different laws governing the food supermarkets and food banks or markets can sell or offer?
Yes. So, I mean, the general thing to understand is that in terms of food donation, the Good Samaritan Act protects you. So we often run into people being scared about donating, but they are protected. The reason, so we deal primarily in produce and bread, and that is because those things aren't processed. So like for us, a silly example is like baby carrots for us, that's processed, whereas a regular carrot that hasn't been processed is different. So we're able to do those regular carrots, not baby carrots, because we have to get more people involved if we're going to do that. So we're able to do produce and bread without a lot of oversight from health and safety. And then also looking at prepared foods. So something like dairy is obviously a whole nother thing that you need to keep refrigerated, and prepared foods require doing a lot of temperature regulation and making sure they're out of the danger zone where foodborne illnesses can develop. So the answer is yes, there definitely are, but don't let it be too much of a barrier, and it's going to vary state by state as well.
Okay. I have a three-part question for you here.
Okay.
What is your perspective on imperfect food delivery services? Is it helping reduce food waste, or is it preventing food insecure individuals from receiving all the resources and support that were previously available before imperfect foods, misfit markets, wonky vegetables, etc.?
Ooh, good one. I guess to me it's similar to food recovery in that I think it raises awareness and maybe makes you go, I'm going to be the person who buys the weird looking one at the grocery store. It makes you just realize that we have certain expectations of food and the way it should look, and that don't necessarily have any value, that we can, I really am that person. Or even not even produce, like the bashed up thing of cereal that, the bag's fine inside, I'll buy that because why not? It's fine. So I think it makes it's brought up that conversation for people. And if it really would, otherwise end up in a waste stream, then I'd rather it be an extra revenue stream for a small farmer or wherever it's coming from. But again, it's working within this imperfect system as well. So I think it does some good things in terms of it taking away in terms of the hunger relief. From what I see just here in Rochester, and we do have a food bank located right here, really centrally, I see a lot of not just imperfect, but just unneeded or like excess come into the system and go further down that hierarchy. So stuff going to farms and compost and all of that. So I don't know how big of a share the misfit market and all of that, how much was going to hunger relief that now is not. So that's a good question. I'd have to look at the numbers, but from my perspective, there's a lot out there that isn't even imperfect, that's not even getting to people.
Okay, this is a question specifically about Flower City Pickers and how they're operating right now.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel the COVID-19 and the mass amounts of panic buying will impact food waste, and how have you seen that impact Flower City Pickers?
So it's been really interesting. So like I said, we stopped working at the market, which was our primary thing. They are still in operation, but because of the close quarters that we work in, we really had to stop and figure out how we would operate safely, and hope to do so once it's warm enough up here in Rochester to separate everybody enough, and have hand washing stations, all of these things. So, however, we were pretty within a week or so of things closing down, started getting calls from restaurants because they had, stocked their walk-in with everything they would need to continue to produce a full menu, and then they were going to curbside and takeout. So the first wave was from restaurants. We work with some small grocery stores, and they would get rid of kind of the imperfect stuff with us, and they've continued to be pretty steady. I thought that might drop out because everybody was buying everything, but they still provide us with some every week. And then, like I kind of said in answer to the last question, we are seeing a lot, like the food bank here has so much food that, they're using it in a lot of different ways. They're doing like boxes for people to pick up and all of that, but even with the amount that they're getting out, which is a lot, and they're doing school programs and a lot of different things, they still have a lot, and we're part of the system that's helped getting it to some of the smaller agencies that they don't work directly with. So I know that's not the case across the country, but for us, it's been that we're seeing a lot coming from the food banks, and we're part of the team helping it get out. So, yeah.
All right, our last question. If people are local to Rochester or visit often, how can we volunteer with Flower City Pickers? And are you looking for more people in this time, or how can we help?
Awesome. I love that question. Yes, so I'll go first with how people can help now. We have, like I said, we're still doing drop-offs. We have about 8 receiving agencies that are still open or operating in a way that they can get things to the people that they serve. So you can email volunteer@flowercitypickers.org. A couple times a week, I send out an email saying we need 4 volunteers at this time, and it's been a great response, but I would put you on that list. You have to have a mask and, not be showing symptoms, that kind of thing. But, and we do no contact deliveries or distanced pickup and no contact, so that we keep everybody in our community safe. So that's the main way that you can volunteer right now if you're in the area. So email us at volunteer@flowercitypickers.org, and I can get you more info. You can also, in general, email that email. And when the market is back in session, we generally have people helping us sort and deliver then as well. So if you're interested in the future, that is a great way to get involved. And then we also, right now, if you find us on Facebook, Flower City Pickers, we right now have a fundraiser up in order to help us get some of these emergency supplies that we need to make sure we have to open back up. Obviously, it wasn't something that was planned for in our budget, so we just need a little help to make sure we can get everything and get back up and running. So yeah, those are the main ways right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Amanda. That's all the questions we have. And thank you everyone for coming. We are going to have at 12 o'clock, I believe, student posters and design review presentations are going to be released. And then we will have our next live speaker at 1 o'clock, and that'll be in the same Zoom room. So thank you everyone for coming.
Thanks, everyone.